Hi guys, my name's Barry and welcome back to the channel. And prepare to be scared for this video because I'm going to be doing my top 10 scariest moments in the Conjuring universe, and I will be showing clips from my scariest moments as well, so be prepared for that. Before I tell you my top 10, this is very important because my top 10 is something or things that scare me or had scared me in the past that made these scenes become part of my top 10 scariest moments. Now, some of these moments in the top 10 might not scare you at all, and that's absolutely fine. There might be moments that scare you more that don't scare me at all. Everyone's different when it comes to scare tactics in horror movies, so bear that in mind when you watch this top 10. In at number 10 is the coin scene in Annabelle Comes Home. When you've got that girl walking around the darkness in the house and she sees coins lying about and she's picking them up as she goes along, and then you see the things in the darkness that she can't see but the audience can see. I think that's excellent because that's something that the Conjuring universe lacked for a good few movies, that there was these scenes in the background that the audience could see and be scared about, but the characters themselves aren't as scared as the audience. So I think that the camera trickery, the way the camera moved in this scene was absolutely fantastic. It's not a pure scary moment, you don't get massive jump scares throughout, but the build up and the tension for that is enough to have this scene in my top 10 alone. And at number 9 is when the priest was buried alive in The Nun. Now, this isn't an entirely scary scene when you're watching the movie, and I wasn't really scared when I watched the film, but when you think about it, being buried alive, for me, that's one of my scariest ways to die. I wouldn't want to be buried alive, and I'm sure nobody would want to be buried alive. But the way that they filmed it was really good. Yes, there's a cheap jump scare at the end because it is The Nun, which wasn't a great film, so they had to add in a jump scare, of course. But the build up to this scene was actually not too bad. It's probably one of the best, if not the best scene in the movie, and it doesn't even involve VALAK as well. But just being buried alive, someone above you, and finding out that you're there, trying to get to you before it's too late, it's actually pretty scary. And at number 8 is the storage and stairs scene in Annabelle 1. How many times have you brushed your teeth at night and tried to run up the stairs thinking that something's behind you? I guarantee that you've done that at least once in your life. I do it all the time, even today. But there's that feeling that you get when you're walking up the stairs and you feel like there's something behind you. Well, in Annabelle, that nightmare came true because not only did you feel like something was behind you in the film, you actually see what was behind you, that demon coming up for her up at the stairs. But the build up to that scene was absolutely fantastic as well, because she's in that storage unit and she sees the buggy or the pram coming out and she's just got that feeling that something's there. So when she runs to the elevator and she tries to close it and it's not closing, that's quite a panicky moment for me anyway. That was quite a panicky moment. No, the film's not perfect, but that scene and leading up to those stairs was absolutely frightening. And at number 7 is VALAK's first full appearance in The Conjuring 2, when Judy was pointing to VALAK in that hall and you just see Lorraine looking over and you see VALAK and then VALAK just disappearing into the next room. I thought to myself, don't go in there, but she obviously goes in there. And I liked the build-up. Now, the build-up might have felt a little bit too long. If they made it a little bit shorter, it would have been better, but I like the build-up because you can see the room spinning as VALAK is walking around into the picture and then she comes storming out through the picture. Now, that was a scary moment, but the build up to it was great. The music was fantastic, very eerie, very scary. And even when the camera was panning round, you could see the Perrin family house there as well. So it's kind of blends into one because you're like, oh my goodness, there's the Perrin house, but there's VALAK walking around in the shadows. It was a really well made scene and it was a good payoff in the end. And at number 6 was when there was something behind the door in The Conjuring 1. Now, as a kid, I watched a lot of horror movies. Probably shouldn't have, but I did anyway, and I absolutely loved my parents for that. But I watched a lot of horror movies, and I always thought there was something in my room, especially behind the door if the door was open. It's 6 and a half a dozen because sometimes I would want my parents to close the door so that I didn't see there was a dark space behind the door, but also I wanted the door opened. And with the door opened, there was that space there. So you could never win. So when I watched this film and seen the kids getting scared because of that moment. It took me back to when I was a child thinking there was something there, whereas in this scene in the movie, there actually was something there. Massively brilliant build up again. The Conjuring 1 was obviously the one with the best scares in it because you didn't know what to expect, but the build up to the scene was great when she was getting pulled and dragged in her bed and then sitting up and just seeing that there was, or hearing that was something there, because the way that they filmed it, you couldn't really see anything, but you could just feel it and you could hear it behind that door. Oh. And then number 5 is the Scarecrow scene in Annabelle Creation. Now, I like the foreshadowing in this film because you saw the Scarecrow beforehand and it looked like the girls were scared of the Scarecrow. So when one of the girls was trapped in the barn with the Scarecrow, that was great. And you just see the Scarecrow, even though it wasn't moving at first, you just felt like it was going to start moving. And when the light started to burst and you could see it moving, that was crazy because you didn't know what to expect. I wish they took that Scarecrow scene a little bit further. I think it was quite short because it was over before you could really get scared, but just the build up to the scene was great, the foreshadowing was great, and just the way it was filmed was, again, it was frightening. And then number 4 is the Manson style opening in Annabelle 1. Now, when I was younger, and when I say younger, I was in my early 20s, maybe late teens, I read about the Manson family murders. I read about what happened on that night. The people who survived, they wrote their account as to what happened and what they saw. And there was this one guy who survived by hiding in the pool shed, and he could see and hear most of the things that were happening that night in real life. And that scared the life out of me. So anytime I saw something about the Manson family, I pictured myself being that person in that pool shed next to where all the crime was happening. So when I saw Annabelle, and it wasn't obviously the Manson family, but the way that it happened, I envisioned the way that happened before I saw the movie, and that's exactly how I would shoot a movie in that style. Just the way that they say, oh, we just leave our doors open at night. I'm just like, oh, please don't leave your door open at night. Lock your doors, lock your windows. And then when you seen the family getting killed next door, and then the pregnant woman, the wife and the husband are going out to find out what's happening, I'm like, just don't do it. So even though you get some kind of cheap jump scares in it, the build up to it was phenomenal, and the storyline behind it, even scarier. And then number 3 is the hide and clap scene in the original Conjuring movie. I think this concept was more scary because you didn't know what to expect. You saw a bit of it in the trailer and that got you excited to see the movie, but when you see it in the film, it's actually a lot scarier than I thought it would have been from what I saw in the trailers. But the build-up, again, everything about the build-ups with the jump scares and the Conjuring were fantastic, but just seeing the mum walking around the house, you just knew what was going to happen. I think this is probably one of the most obvious ones on the list, but even though it was obvious, you were still kind of like, oh, please, please. And then when she's like, where are you? And you just see that clap coming out of the wardrobe, you're like, oh my God. And obviously that all built up to the most famous hide and clap scene, or the clap scene that you saw in the trailer as well. To this day, I still think it was absolutely genius. My house! And then number 2 is the Bill Wilkins My House scene in The Conjuring 2. The Conjuring 2 is probably the closest that you're going to get to the Conjuring 1 in terms of the build-up scenes with the jump scares, and that's all thanks to James Wan. And you see Janet home alone, and she's a bit bored, but she's also a little bit sceptical because she feels like there's something beside her or around her. And then when Bill Wilkins is playing with the remote control, you're like, oh, what's going to happen here? I wasn't expecting to see or hear what I did. I think that's what makes this scene scarier, because I was expecting maybe her hearing a noise going up the stairs and she's having to go up the stairs, etc., or go into the kitchen, and that didn't happen. It was kind of cut short in a good way, because when Bill Wilkins said that My House scene, I completely jumped out my seat in the cinema. And then number 1 is the demon on top of the wardrobe scene in The Conjuring 1. This scene caught me completely off guard, because throughout the film you had these long build-up scenes that had really good payoffs, and even though they had good payoffs, you didn't see much. You maybe saw the hand clapping, you just saw something like the the pictures falling down the stairs and things like that. Things that could be explained away. But when the build-up for this one was so short, I got a jump, I got a scare because of what we saw, but I wasn't expecting to see a physical demon on top of the wardrobe and then jumping down on top of one of the daughters. I was just like, whoa, that scared the life out of me. It was a great build-up because of the head banging, etc. Fantastic. And obviously seeing it for the first time in the cinema was great because everybody in the cinema just completely jumped. Everybody, not everyone, but a lot of people laughed after it. And they didn't laugh because they thought it was stupid. They laughed because they were all nervous. They were all scared because after that scene, we didn't know what to expect. Throughout the first half of the film, it was just things happening here and there, not seeing too much, just getting a little bit scared. But when that happened, that was it. All bets were off for us because we're like, okay, we've had the build-ups, now we've had physical demons jumping on top of the daughters. What's going to happen next? So it left the rest of the movie with us thinking, I don't know if we should watch the rest of the song. Should we close our eyes, cover them a little bit? It was great. It was absolutely fantastic. Just seeing the demon's face, the way that it looked, the way that it jumped down, it gives me chills to this day. So that is my top 10 scariest moments in the Conjuring universe. Sadly, there's no scariest moment for The Nun 2 or The Conjuring, The Devil Made Me Do It. Those movies are probably some of the worst movies in the franchise that just have cheap jump scares. So they didn't scare me too much, but the rest of them were actually pretty good. But what are your top 10 moments, guys? Remember, nobody's wrong because what scares you might not scare me. What scares me might not scare you, but leave your top 10 moments. Also comment on mine as well. Do you think my top 10 was pretty scary? Do any of my top 10 make your top 10? Leave your comments down below. Let me know what you think, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
I'll be right back.
What are you waiting for, huh?
Coming to get you, Barbara.
Ever played Skin the Cat?
Someone's in the back!